You guys love comparisons. Today, I've got a fun one for you. Beef front quarter versus a beef hind quarter. I'm gonna go through, we're gonna break these down. We're gonna cut out all the potential cuts you can get off of these. We're gonna compare what you can get on a front quarter to what you can get off of a hind quarter. That way, when you go to your local butcher, you ask for a roast, you ask for a steak, you know exactly what you're gonna get and where it comes from. Let's get started. We're gonna start by breaking it between the 5th and 6th rib. So we're gonna count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're gonna make a cut all the way through. So you can see it on this side. And we'll just take our 10-inch breaking knife and we'll just go all the way through, separating the rib from the chuck. So right here, you have your rib, which is your rib roast, your rib steaks, tomahawks, that sort of thing. You have your short rib, you have your plate, your brisket, your shank, your arm, your chuck, your neck. Let's just dissect them out. So I know you guys have seen this in a lot of our other videos. I've done these breakdowns before. Today, we're just gonna go through them again. I don't wanna skip anything. We don't wanna fast forward. I wanna show you how we cut it. It's gonna be more of a custom style cut, so keep that in mind. We're not gonna be doing boneless versions. We're not gonna be doing your flat irons and your, your mock tenders and stuff like that. We're gonna be doing bone-in version on most of it. Maybe do some ribeyes and things like that, but we're gonna go like porterhouse and T-bones and stuff on the hind quarter. But you'll get the gist. Just follow along. We're gonna get started by pulling out the skirt steak. Cutting off that beef plate. Cutting off those ribs. I'll get some short ribs out of those. This is the rib section. We're just gonna prep it for cutting some steaks. Gonna cut a few of the best short ribs off of this. So I want to show you this cutting slip here for a second. The way our cutting slips are made, this top portion all the way down to the flank is the front quarter. So soup bones, short ribs, ribeye steaks or rib steaks. You can cut a prime rib roast if you want. Chuck blade steaks, chuck arm. We can get some stew meat, brisket. Those are all your front quarter. The hind quarter, we have the flank, round tip, the round, rolled rump, sirloin, porterhouse, T-bone, that sort of thing. So the way our slips are split up is we have the front quarter and the hind quarter. So when you go to your butcher and you ask for a quarter of a beef, you might want to specify, is it a front quarter or is it a hind quarter? Another option that you may want to ask is if it's a split quarter, because some processors will give you a portion of each where you can actually choose some of the front and some of the hind. We just pull this membrane off the skirt, making a nicer product for the consumer. So Sean did save me that skirt off that plate as well. So now that we have these, we typically just roll them up like this. And that's how we give them to the customer. So I typically get some short ribs out of the rib portion, then I also get some out of the arm, which I'll show you here in a second. Just trim them up a little bit. This is the entire beef chuck. We're gonna cut the shank and the brisket. We're gonna separate it from the arm, typically about a 2-finger width away from this bone you can see right there. So make a visual. If you get a nice figure 8 right there, you know you've hit it just about perfect. Separate that shank. There's the brisket. We'll get into those here in a second. We want to start by cutting some arm roast. Makes a beautiful pot roast. We like to cut these about 2 to 3 pounds each. We normally get 5 2 to 3 pound arm roasts out of a front of beef. So once I get my arm roast cut off, I turn my chuck. I square it up a little bit, and I start cutting chuck roast. We typically get 7 to 8 chuck roasts per front of beef. This is the beef neck. We typically just bone it out for grinds. It's going over to the table. Everybody wants to know what knife we're using. Y'all should know by now, 6-inch Victorinox. It's got our logo on it. Semi-stiff boning knife. Got the F-Dick 10-inch polished smooth steel. They're on our website as my favorite combo. Might as well be the 6th finger. Absolutely love this knife. Let's get into a brisket. If you request a beef brisket, you can only get a brisket if you're getting a front quarter of beef. Don't go to your butcher and buy a hind quarter and expect to get a brisket. It's not going to happen. It's only from the front of the beef. So let's separate these bones. We'll trim this out for some ground meats. Take a little bit of this fat off of here. When we prep these for our service counter, we typically leave a decent amount of fat on these because we don't know how the end user is going to prepare them. We don't know if they're going to be using a smoker or if they're making it into corned beef. So we typically leave a nice little layer of fat on there, more of like your packer style, and we let the person who buys it choose how much fat they want to take off. So that, we have the point, we have the flat. That is a full brisket ready for your smoker. Beef chuck roast, we're just going to go through this stack. I'll show you how we trim them. As mentioned earlier, we typically do about a 2 to 3 pound chuck roast. We take this yellow cord out of each one because I don't think anybody wants to get a hold of that in their crock pot. It's just a real nice 2 to 3 pound beef chuck roast. Now, when we get down here, you can see the blade. This is that shoulder blade starting to come into play. So I typically Just cut them like this. And we'll stack these up and then we'll go through and scrape them all as well. Some real nice chuck roasts. Now some of these I can't cut in half with my knife because obviously there's a bone in the way. So I will need to set these on the saw and I'll need to use the saw to cut those in half. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to prep them all first and then I'll go back through and make them smaller. Any of these pieces like this that I'm trimming off, these are going over to the boning table and these will all get trimmed out for some ground beef products. Now that I have my stack of chuck blade roasts, I'll show you how we trim them on the saw. I always notch the edge of this bone off a little bit because if you don't, it'll cut through your vacuum seal bag. So each one of these I'm just going to go through and cut in half, getting the size of the roast that we're looking for. Want to trim a little bit of that exterior fat off there, just so they're not quite so fat. Let's go through each one and do a little bit of final trimming. And we'll stack them in our piles. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 chuck blade roasts. I'll go through and I'll scrape these a little bit before they go into a package off to the arm roasts. This one we don't save as a roast because this bone right here is just too large. The amount of bone versus the amount of meat, it's not worth saving for a roast. So with these, I'll add these to my short rib stash. Typically make them 4 ribs long. We'll just add them over there. These are your arm roast. You're gonna get 3 boneless and 2 bone in. So we'll just add them to our pile. So this one, you're going to get the nice round bone in there for that pot roast. And then you're going to get your boneless one as well. So there's 3. Get our short rib. And this will be number 4 and 5. Now that we have the roast cut, we're going to go back through, take our metal scraper, and get that bone dust off of there, and just pretty them up for the package. We certainly wouldn't want to put these into a package looking like that. That bone dust can turn a little bit gray over time in a vacuum seal. So it's all about presentation and quality. Cross your T's, dot your I's, because it's what our dad taught us. Drill sergeant in Vietnam, and you can bet if we didn't cross our T's and dot our I's, we were getting a boot up our hind end. Beef front shank, we're gonna cut this into some soup bones. Pretty simple process. Cross-cut shanks, otherwise known as soup bone. All the other bones on this will get saved for your precious little pooch. So those aren't going to get thrown away. Those are dog bones, but that's a cross-cut shank off of the front quarter. Here again, we'll just go through, clean them up, and they'll go into a package. The rib section. This can be rib steaks, rib eyes, standing rib roast. Today, we're going to do rib eye steaks. Keep it pretty simple. Here again, if you get some meat from your processor and you order a hind quarter and you ask for rib eye steaks, don't expect them because they don't live on the hind quarter. They're located on the front. So, just going to go through, remove the bones, staying as close to that bone as possible. Take this outer cap off of here. A lot of this just comes apart by following the seam and applying a little bit of pressure and knowing where to cut. This yellow cord removed. Trim it up a little bit. Any trimming that you do as a whole section prior to cutting it into steaks is less trimming you have to do on each individual steak. So just try to get things all nice and cleaned up. Now we're going to remove these beef backbones. We're going to save this, all these ribs, and somebody can barbecue them, slow smoke them, and they're going to be delicious. So if you were to leave this bone in, it'd be called a rib steak. We're taking the bone out today and making them rib eyes. So that's a beef back rib. We're going to save that just like that. We're going to leave the membrane and everything on it. That way your ribs don't fall apart. And we're going to start cutting some rib eye steaks. Rib eye steaks, start by squaring them up just a little bit. We're going to cut these about 1.25 inches thick all the way down through this rib section, or rib eye section rather. Beautiful marbling, just a fantastic rib eye. Sure wouldn't mind having my freezer full of those. Just take a little bit of that tail off of there. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 ribeye steaks cut about 1.25 inches. And these I would love to put in my freezer, but they're going out for sale to the customer. Those are some dandies. Front quarter's wrapped up. You can see it on the table. The hind quarter's still hanging behind me. Let's get started on that. Once we get the hind quarter done, we'll do a full overview of everything on our table. We're gonna split it down the middle. We're gonna show you front, hind.
We have a new category, which is our DIY, and it includes casings, powders, dried jalapenos, dried fruit, our base flavors for bratwurst, for summer sausage, for sticks, our maple seasoning, which is absolutely amazing, and does some of our bratwurst and our breakfast sausages, bearded butcher blend, and our 4 main flavors, and then high temp cheese. What we have in front of us will do a majority of our white feather meats products, and we're opening it up for DIY because
we've spent the last 25 years developing these spices. These are the ones that we use in our commercial setting. We've also used these in our garage type environment, at home, whether you're making brats, sticks, you name it. Now it's time to take our favorite products, get them into your hands so you can enjoy some of these incredible items. Start with removing this rose meat on this hind. We're gonna pull this flank. So just remember through this process, if there's a cut that you didn't see me do, and you're like, man, I wonder why he's not cutting that when I've seen him do it before, it's because we're doing this more of a custom cut style. There's really a difference. There's a retail version and a custom version in this business, and today we're doing more of just your custom cutout. That's the reason why some of those cuts I didn't save. That's your beef flank. We'll trim it out. Beef flank steak. Start with peeling this membrane. This is one of those cuts where if you order a front quarter from your butcher, wonder why you can't get a flank steak. It's because it doesn't live on the front quarter. It lives on the hind quarter. Once we get that membrane off there, there's a natural seam right here where we're gonna start pulling that flank steak out. If you've never had a flank steak butterflied and filled with feta cheese and onions and peppers, a little bit of our chipotle seasoning on there, smoked, you're missing out. There's a video on our channel on how to do that. Once we get down here to the end, we'll just strip the rest of this out. Just like that. And we'll just trim it up for a nice flank steak. So you can see this fat down here. Just follow that fat curvature. Trim just a little bit of that fat off. There you have real nice beef flank steak. Tri-tip, round tip, that's what's next. So we want to start right here at this knuckle. Find this seam for this tri-tip. There's a natural seam right there that you want to follow. Once you find that seam, you can just take that right out of there. Beef tri-tip. Comes out of this cap of the sirloin tip. It's this muscle located right here on the top. So let's just fabricate it out of there. That's the sirloin tip or the round tip. We'll get to that here in a second. We want to do the tri-tip first. People thought we were crazy when we made a video a couple years ago about this unknown cut here in the Midwest. But I'm telling you, it's not something we typically cut 4 or 5 years ago. It got real popular here in the Midwest, and for good reason. It's an absolute, just scrumptious steak. You can leave the fat cover on to your liking, or ask the butcher to do it to your liking. This is typically how we prepare them for our meat case. I know some people like more of the fat left on them, but our customers prefer that they're trimmed up a little bit more. So we'll just take that extra fat out of there. We're gonna flip it over. We're gonna fillet that like a fish. Take a little bit more of that silver skin and that membrane off the bottom. Just like that. You have a beautifully trimmed beef tri-tip just begging to go on your smoker. Beef round tip, otherwise known as a sirloin tip. One of our favorite beef roasts. Square it up just a little bit. I'm gonna cut, I think we'll do 4 out of this one today. If you're looking to make some barbecued beef, this one's the one to do it. Put this in a crock pot, pull it apart, it's delicious. So, round tip, sirloin tip, they're the same cut. You can just call them 2 different things. Get that beef kidney out of there, that'll make some pet food. I know some people like to eat it, but not me. And we'll just work at getting this kidney suet out of here. You want to be real careful when you do this, because located right underneath this fat is that tenderloin. You certainly don't want to cut into that. So just start up along this vertebrae. You want to know something that'll work you in this business, it's doing stuff like this. It gets those forearms pumping, all that pulling. So once we get that fat started, you can just use your tip of your knife to keep pulling it out. Just being real careful, because right there is that beef tenderloin. You don't want to put a bunch of cut marks in that. There's your beef suet. That'll go for birds and for added into deer meat and all kinds of good stuff. So we want to separate this short loin from this round. And the way you do that is there's this ball joint right here. So you want to start your knife right there at that ball joint and come all the way around to that tailbone right there. And then we'll take our handsaw. We'll cut through that ball joint. We'll just cut this all the way off. Look at that butcher's dollar right there. You know you broke it down properly when you get that butcher's dollar in there. Back in the day, hearsay is that they used to get paid based on how many of those they cut per day. So there's your butcher's dollar. Sirloin, porterhouse, T-bone. That's what we're gonna cut off of this. We're gonna do the bone-in version. You can see the tenderloin here. The sirloin's on the bottom. We roll this up. We have the New York strips right here. If we were gonna do boneless, we would do filet, boneless sirloin and strip, but today we're doing bone-in. So we're doing bone-in sirloin, we're doing porterhouse, we're doing T-bone. If there's still confusion on that, refer back to some videos that we've done. We've done a full explanation on bone-in versus boneless, filet and strip versus porterhouse T-bone. It can be confusing. They're all right there. Before we get started on that, we're gonna do the hind quarter. We're gonna fabricate this round apart into all the different muscle structures. We're going to start by removing this hind shank. We're going to find this knuckle. We're going to take this hind shank off of here. We'll cut this into some soup bones. We're going to get the H-bone out of here. Moving this oyster steak. We don't typically save, but you can if you want. Get your knife started around this bone. This is the pelvic bone, the H-bone. You got to find that ball joint and that knuckle. Moving that H-bone out of there. Trim it up just a little bit and we'll pull the femur. So on this round consists of 3 main muscle structures. We have the top round, the eye round, and the bottom round. There's also a rolled rump here on the end. What a lot of processors will do, they'll cut this into round steaks, which you get a portion of your top, eye, and bottom all in that round steak. You can do those round steaks tenderized, you can do cube steaks, you can make this boneless, you can cut London broils, eye of rounds. Today, we are gonna make this boneless. So as mentioned, I'm gonna pull this femur out of here. And then we'll separate each piece of this round by its specific muscle. So just want to get this loosened up, and then we can pull that femur right out of there. Now what we want to do is we want to find these natural seams in this round. We're going to grab our meat hook. We're going to pull this heel. This is the heel around. We don't typically save it. You can save it as a roast. We don't typically save it. We don't get a lot of requests for it. So that's the heel around. Start prettying this up a little bit. So continue with this seam. This is the top round, this is the eye round, this is the bottom. So you just want to take your knife and follow that natural seam out, removing the top round. Now you want to come over here and you want to cut your eye round. So there's your eye round. We'll trim all of these up a little bit more here in a second. Now you want to do your bottom round. So today I think what we're going to do is we're going to do some London broils and we're going to do some round roasts off of these. We're just going to go down through this bottom round and cut some 2 to 3 pound bottom round roasts. Beef eye round. Just going to trim it up a little bit. This makes a great roast. So that's what we're going to save it for today. You can cut it into cube steak and jerky and things like that, but today we're going with the eye of round. So once you get it trimmed up a little bit, get those high ridges off of there, we're just going to cut it in half. Cut a couple real nice 2 to 3 pound eye round roasts. Beef top round. We're going to cut some London broils. So we want to start by removing this vein out of here. We want to take all this excess off of here that wouldn't be fit for a London broil. Move some of that silver skin. Now that we have that prepped, we're just going to square it up. This portion can get made into some stew meat. And then we're going to cut these about 2 to 2.5 inches thick per London broil. That's just a real nice top round steak. It's just one of the many versions that you can do with this beef round. And today, this is the one we chose. We're gonna do the same thing with the hind shank as we did with the front. We're just gonna cut these into some cross-cut shanks, some soup bones. Pretty much the same deal as the front. Now it's time for some sirloins, porterhouses, and T-bones. Square them up a little bit. We're gonna set our saw about 1 inch thick. We're just gonna do some bone-in sirloins. We want to leave a little bit of a tail on these, but not too much. These are the porterhouses and T-bones if you needed.
Are we getting started on the video?
What?
Are we getting started on the video?
You're a little late to the party, sir.
He's like 3/4 of the way done. I didn't just show up to the building, but I just showed up in his station.
I questioned his presence.
He was
I didn't know if
getting on
he...
me for talking too loud in the other room.
I asked everybody, I was like, is he louder today than he normally is? Because I feel like he's talking really loud. Porterhouses and T-bones. We'll get them cut and then we'll go through each one and we'll trim them. So there's your porterhouse. 2, 4, 6, 7 porterhouse. 1, 2. Let's call it 8 porterhouses and 9 T-bones. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back through each of these and I'm just going to trim a little bit of that fat off. If you see the blue on there, that's just the ink from the USDA inspection. With the passing the final inspection in the grading. So if you wonder what that blue ink is, that's what it is. It is food grade. We typically just trim it off, that way the consumer doesn't question whether it is. We'll just go down through each one and trim them up all nice and neat. So for these bone-in sirloins, we do have to cut through that bone right there, and I'll show you how we trim these out. You're not going to be able to do it unless you cut through that bone on a couple of the first ones. So we're just going to get started trimming these. If there's a bunch of gristle in it, we typically just save the portion that's better. Just make some nice little sirloin pieces. Like these right here, these are those ends. Has a little piece of the fillet in there and a little piece of the sirloin. So if you get an animal custom process, you may see these in your order somewhere, and that's what those are and where they come from. because we would certainly hate to see those little chunks go into ground beef. So those are just little sirloin pieces. Now we can do the bigger sirloins. Follow this natural seam around the end, around that piece of filet. Get you a real nice bone-in sirloin. It's a big steak. These, you know, some families might be able to thaw out one steak and feed a couple people with one steak. So that's something to keep in mind too when you go to your processor and you are trying to decide how many steaks you want per package. The size of the steak might determine on how many you want in a bag, depending on how many people you're going to feed. It's a nice stack of bone-in sirloins. Let's add them to our pile. There's a front and hind hanging behind me. There's also a front and hind lying on the table. Let's do an overview of what we cut. Starting with those skirt steaks, the beef brisket, beef short ribs, those scrumptious ribeye steaks, beef back ribs, arm roasts. We have 5 of those. We have 10 chuck blade roasts. We have those soup bones, there's 3 of those, and a little pile of stew meat. This line in the table separates the front from the hind. As we do this explanation, hopefully this trains you, teaches you when you go to your processor, you'll have a better understanding what comes with the front, what comes with the hind. That's our goal. Hopefully we're achieving that goal today. On the hind quarter, we have some beef stew meat, we have that flank steak, we have some London broils, there's 4 of those. We have that beautiful beef tri-tip roast. Couple eye round roasts. We have 4 round tips, also known as the sirloin tip. We have some bottom round roasts. We have the bone-in sirloins. We have the T-bones. We have the porterhouse steaks, some little sirloin pieces of steak here, and we have those soup bones. That's what you can get on a hind. That's what you can get on a front. I'm bringing Scott in for this next portion. He did some yield percentages, and he's going to tell us what you can expect on a front and hind when it comes to cuts versus ground meats.
That's right. So obviously value what you paid for, what the choice was, whether it was a front or a hind. You're going to find that fronts are priced lower than hinds because the front doesn't have as many of your steaks in it. Plain and simple. You're going to have just the rib eyes, and then you're going to have mostly roast. With the exception of being your skirt steak if you cut a chuck eye steak or something like that. This entire half, I wrote it down this time. I mean, why not? I've been memorizing everything, but 437 was the carcass hanging weight. That was after it was dry aged, so that was the actual weight. The front weighed 230 and the hind weighed 207. So the front was a little heavier by hanging weight. However, off your front, you're gonna get a slightly lower yield because it's gonna have more fat and bone. Less muscle. So off of our front, we expect about a 62% yield, which would give you about 142 pounds of actual processed meat. So out of that processed meat, we could expect about 55% of it, the way it's cut here, to be your cuts, and the other 45% to be your ground meat. So roughly 78 pounds of cuts in front of us, and we yield about 64 pounds of ground meat off your front. So 230 hanging weight, it's going to yield out about 142 pounds of packaged meat. Out of that, about 78 pounds is going to be your cuts, and 64 is going to be your ground meats. Hind, so 207 pounds carcass hanging weight. We expect a higher yield, about 65%, so we got more muscle there. So you got about 135 pounds of actual processed, ready to package meat. Bear in mind, it's going to have a lot of your high value steaks in it. So out of that 135 pounds, roughly half of it, or a little over half of it, 55% will be cuts, so about 75 pounds. The remainder will be ground meat, which will be about 60 pounds. Typically off of a hind, your ground meats are going to be leaner, And of course, like we said, fewer roasts, more steaks, leaner ground beef. That's where the value comes in with the Hind. So whatever your choice is, whether it's a front or Hind, what suits you best. If you want more roasts, more ground beef, less steaks, you're gonna go with your front quarter. If you like to eat a lot of steak, a lot of leaner meats, a lot of leaner roasts, leaner ground beef, you're gonna want the Hind quarter.
Or you see if your processor can give you a portion of each. Do a split quarter, they get another party involved, and you both, it's a one for you, one for them, all the way down the middle. You get a portion of the front and Hind. So great explanation on the yield, Scott. Hopefully you approve of my cuts.
It looks fantastic.
Thank you. We wanted to go a little bit old school with this video. We've been doing a lot of the DIY processing, things like that, but we wanted to just do some straight up butchering content for you guys. Appreciate every single one of you. It's why we do it. So thank you. If you could, for us, just go up, hit that subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. Follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and TikTok. We plan on doing a whole bunch more. So as long as we can do this, we plan on doing it. And until next time, see ya.